Hey guys, Less is More back here with another video. Today we're going to be discussing turn probing and delayed c-betting. I haven't decided if I'm going to split this into two videos or not, just depends on how long turn probes take. But this is specifically, we're going to start with turn probing on wet ragged boards, as we did the same textures on the imposition c-betting on the flop. Let's see, what was it? Yesterday? Yeah. So we're just gonna go through, look. So as I said in the beginning of the video yesterday, it's important on these wet rag boards that you study the checkback lines so you know how to play turns and rivers in the delay line. So yeah, we're just going to go through this and talk about different turns and how the out of position strategy should look. So yeah, hope you guys learned something. So one nice thing about these sims that Zenith put out is that in the probe line, there's loads of different sizes. So it ranges from, so it's quarter pot, half pot, 150% pot, and 2x pot, and then 4x pot. So a wide range. So we're going to go through some different board textures and look at some turns and take a look at the overall strategy. So first we'll talk about ace 9-6. So on the flop, it's going to be a lot of small betting from the imposition player along with some checkbacks. So on this board, obviously the imposition player is going to be doing pretty well with a nut and range advantage. They're going to have all the pocket nines, aces, sixes, while the opposition player shouldn't have nines or aces. And yeah, the imposition player should have the ace 9 off, ace 9 suited, a6 suited, a6 off, all that good stuff. And the opposition player should be 3-betting a decent amount of a6 off. So, a good advantage for the imposition player on this board. In the check line, so one thing you have to think about is how the turn changes the board texture. So on like an offsuit deuce, the imposition player is going to maintain this advantage that he had on the flop. Just because he checked back doesn't mean his range is now weak. For like, he should still be mixing in plenty of top pairs and strong hands. Some strong hands into this line. Not too often, but he should still have an overall advantage in the check line. So like on a, let's say an offsuit deuce, see this out of position player still has, it is quite at a disadvantage on this turn. So the out of position player isn't incentivized to do a bunch of betting because the imposition player is still at such an advantage that he should still be betting a decent amount, even though he checked back on the flop. In the check line, the imposition player should be checking back the turn more than he would the flop, because much of his range after it goes check on the flop is incentivized to check back the turn as well on a brick, because like not many of his hands have improved, so a lot of those hands in the check line are just going to check back the turn as well on a card that doesn't change the texture at all. So as the out of position player, you have to start doing a bit of betting. So one thing to note is the imposition player will be a bit capped. So the out of position player should be developing an overbetting range for the turn probes on this blank card. Like I know I said on the flop, the imposition player is going to be checking back some strong hands, which is true. Like, see, like ace king check back some this time, but like the vast majority of their strongest hands are betting on this board. So a hand like ace 9 betting most of the time, sixes, nines, aces are betting almost 100% of the time. Some a6 off is checking back. You'll see like top and bottom pair check back more often than the other two-pair variety of two-pair. So in the check line, the out-of-position player can do some 4x probing. Basically, the brickier the card, the more polarized your strategy should be. So on this low brick, it's basically just 4x pot or check as the out-of-position player. As far as the range construction, you can mix in some bottom pair. So this is specifically a rainbow turn, so it's going to be hard to find a bunch of natural bluffs. You'll have gut shots, 8-5, 7-5, and then 4-5, 5-3, and then like some bottom pair mixed in. And then you'll be value betting your bottom set, and then mixing your higher sets. So sixes, if you notice in the check line, when the in-position player checks back the flop, when you check again, the in-position player is going to be checking back the vast majority of their 6x. So when you have pocket sixes as the out-of-position player, you block in-position's check back, so you can mix those into the check line on the turn. And then when you face a bet, you can just check raise them and get 2 bets in. But obviously you can mix that into the 4x line as well, unblocking the calling range. So when you 4x, they should be calling a decent amount of worse hands, even as weak as king, and then like their strongest ace-x. Okay, so on some low, so see the other low bricks, yeah, brick 3, pretty much the same thing. 4, pretty much the same thing. On a 5, it's going to be a bit different. Okay, so you see it tend more towards 2x pot. Then you actually start to see some small betting. On this card, I would just 2x pot or check. And then on the pairing turns, you're usually going to see some overbets and some smaller bets mixed in. On this one specifically, let's see. Let's look at the 9. Okay, so I suppose this board is just so good for the in-position player that we're not going to be doing much betting, but you'll see on like some other boards on a turn pair, you'll have like some half potting and some 2x or 4x pot. But on this board, it just looks like 2x or check pretty much. On the paired ace, yeah, you see like almost checking your entire range as the out of position player. But you can do some small betting with your ace-x. But yeah, for these middling cards, this is where it gets a little tricky, and it's a bit nuanced. So on a card like an 8, the out-of-position player has a good bit of 2-pair and straights, so like 9, 10, 11, like 12.5% of 2-pair plus, and then the in-position player doesn't have many. So it's in this checkback line, the in-position player has, see, like 5, 6, like 7.5% 2-pair plus. And then, but if we look at that, so if you notice, this is a very polar strategy for the out-of-position player. It's pretty much 2x or check. If we look at a slightly different card, like a 7, the out-of-position player is using a bit over a pot size bet and a half pot bet at a pretty decent frequency. Still, overall on all these cards, there's going to be a low betting frequency. And you shouldn't be blocking much at all on these ace-high boards in general. But if we look at why, so like the 8 and the 7 are very similar cards, but if we look at why this might be, well, the out-of-position player has a similar advantage at the top of the range on these cards. Well, we can see here as far as like density of nutted hands. So it's like 9, 10, 13, like 14.5% of 2-pair plus, and then the in-position player has a bit more of these hands mixed in, and the in-position player even has some straights. So doing loads of overbetting when the in-position player also has loads of the nuts. Well, not loads, but much more than the 8. Like the in-position player on this card has over 3% straights, and on the 8, the in-position player has less than 1%. So it's a pretty significant difference once you're talking about that narrow portion of the range. But it's a similar idea throughout No Limit Hold'em, where if your opponent has a higher density of nutted hands, then you're not going to be wanting to do loads of big betting as the opponent, because once you go so big, you only get called by better. So you can't do much betting. Like you can't do much thin value betting. So betting small pretty much becomes useless. So that's sort of the idea. But basically, on these cards that change the texture a good bit and like gives you plenty of 2-pair and like improves some of your ace-x to 2-pair, but also gives the in-position player a good number of straights, then you're not going to want to use as polarized of a strategy, and you're going to want to mix in like some half pot. I would just exclusively use like a 3/4 size here. It's possible I would want to improve my strategy and use like a half pot and an overbet size, but I would just use, I mean, in game currently I'm just using a half pot size on this turn, but it looks like I can improve on that. And then on the 8, I would also be using exclusively a half pot size in this card end game. But as I take a look further into these sims, it looks like I can improve on that. But just realize how nuanced this is. If your opponent isn't playing close to GTO pre, you can mix in small bets on all of these middling cards, and it's fine. But yeah, on these flush draw cards, let's see. Yeah, on these flush draw cards, your massive bet frequency is going to go down. Notice the frequency is pretty much the same, but on the deuce of clubs, we do a lot more 2xing than we do 4xing. Just that your opponent has more flush draws they can defend with versus the big bet, and they're not going to have as much trouble defending against the 4x pot bet. They'll be betting the majority of their flush draws on the flop, but on the turn they'll still have some flush draws they can defend with in this line, as long as along with all of their ace-x and 2-pair and such. Let's look at a slightly different texture. Let's look at 10-5-2. Check. Let's see. So check. So here's sort of the situation I was talking about at the beginning of the video. So like on these lower boards, basically on these lower boards, you're going to be using a much less polar strategy as the out of position prober. So yeah, on these lower boards, you're going to be betting like loads of 10x and like even as low as like 5x and deuce x for protection. On these Broadway cards, so to be specific, this is a block size and a 4x size. So you'll be mixing like your nutted hands into this 4x size. And then you'll be doing some blocking with like this 10x region and some of your stronger 5x. But notice after the, let's say it's like a brick. Notice the equity advantage, the equity disadvantage is much smaller. Like the imposition player on this flop isn't as crushing on this board as like an ace high board, as we saw earlier, where the imposition equity was like over 50%. So on this board, yeah, you're just going to be wanting to use a more linear strategy in the check line. See, so like on a low pairing turn, you'll have like some half pot and 4x pot with your trips, and then the half pot is just a bunch of 10x and some 5x, pretty much. Yep. So to look at some other turns, so if it's a flush draw turn, you see the size get pushed down a little bit, like the 4x, so equilibrium becomes a bit more indifferent between the 4x and the 2x size on the flush draw card. That's going to be a recurring pattern on these flush draw cards. Again, the imposition player isn't going to have as much trouble defending against the massive bet when they turn a decent number of flush draws, or just enough to defend against the big bet. So let's see, on a middle pair, yeah, so again, some half pot and 2x. So on the 5 specifically, this is a good point. I should have made this. I'm glad I can bring this up. So the deuce, if we look at the percentage of 3 of a kind in each range, so the out of position player here has just under 3%, and the in position player has less than 1%, right? So the out of position player is at a pretty sizable advantage in trips, whereas on the 5, so the out of position player has 7% and the in position player has almost 3.5%. So it's still a big advantage, and as far as like the difference in percentages, it's similar, but the again, the in position player has enough nutted hands to defend against a massive bet, say like 4x, whereas on the deuce, the in position player has like less than 1%. And similar thing we saw on the ace 9-6. On the turned 8, the in position player turned less than 1% of straights, so the out of position player is using a much more polar strategy and can just put in a bunch of big bets. Whereas on the 7, both players have a decent number of straights, even though the out of position player has an overall nutted advantage on the turn. It's going to drive the sizing down simply because the nutted advantage isn't so crushing for the in position player, or in favor of the out of position player, I should say. Okay, and then a 10, I would imagine the size goes down even more. Okay, so yeah, on the 10, both players are going to have a decent number of trips. So here the out of position player has just under 9%, in position has over 9%. So it makes sense we're not doing any overbetting on this turn. So it's just exclusively half pot. And then on this turn, we're value betting a bunch of 5x, which makes sense. Like this is a 5 on this board is quite strong. And if we bet half pot, you should be getting called by a decent amount of ace high. Okay. Actually, let's look at some Broadway cards. So let's start with an ace. So yeah, it makes sense. Like in the imposition player on this board is going to be checking back loads of ace high. See, like all this middling ace x is going to be checking back. So on the turned ace, the out of position player is not going to have a lot of incentive to bet at all, and you definitely shouldn't be value betting thin on this card, because like if you bet like half pot or whatever, like you're just crushed by, like, they have all this ace x in this line that you're going to get called by, and then it's not great for you. So your overall frequency should go down, and on this card you pretty much only have incentive to bet like the very top of your range, like sets and two pair and such. So keep that in mind. On this turned ace, you shouldn't be doing any block betting, or anything that isn't very, very polar, basically. On a king, similar thing. You'll be developing a small betting range on these other Broadway cards, because like the imposition range isn't going to be nearly as ace x, or nearly as king x and queen x and jack x dense as it will on the ace turn. Like on the ace turn, that's just like the best card in the deck for the imposition player, really. But like on the king and the queen and the jack, like the imposition player is still going to be checking back a bunch of ace high. So you can start to value bet a bit thinner on those lower Broadway cards. And basically, the lower the Broadway card, the higher the frequency for the out of position player, the overall betting frequency, I should say, and the more robust a block size you can have. On these lower turns, yeah, you'll just be using a more linear strategy for half pot or so. This should be the case for, like, on these low boards, like for most lower cards, this should be the case. On some of these cards where the out of position player turns a lot of straights into pair, you'll see some more overbetting. So let's see. So like on a six of, we can look at the six of hearts. You'll see a wide range of sizes used, but like the frequency goes up a lot, as opposed to like a Broadway card. Okay. But yeah, like on this 6, you'll see 4-3 turns a straight. Let's see. The imposition player. Yeah, so the imposition player has 0 straights. So it makes sense that we should have some big bets as the out of position player, and like less than 2% of 2 pair plus. So it's a pretty good card to put in some big bets. But again, on these lower cards, you can use a more linear strategy. Like I just use half pot or 2x on this turn in game. Interesting. Okay. Let's look at king. So these double Broadway boards are going to play pretty differently on the turn in the check line. So let's take a look at that. So check, and then low brick. And again, we'll see some big 4x on these low bricks. On these double Broadway boards, you'll start to see a bit of smaller betting. So like on this card specifically, I'm not going to be doing any. So like my current strategy is just big bet or check on these Broadway boards. It looks like you can start to do some small betting, but I don't implement that myself. Okay. Let's see. We see on the flush draw card again, the massive bet frequency goes down. But yeah, notice the overall frequency for the out of position player on these Broadway boards it is going to be pretty low regardless of the turn. Yeah, so on a 9, a 9's a pretty connected card. Plenty of turn 2 pair and straights and such. So the in position player is going to have some straights, but plenty of 2 pair. But neither of us are going to have a high density of nutted hands. But the in position player will have enough on this turn to defend. And again, if it's like a flush draw card, you'll see like the sizing go down even more, I would imagine. Okay, yeah, so the overbet size does get reduced. But it's going to be similar. See on the 10? Yeah, pretty much exclusively half pot. Yeah, I mean the in position player density of straights is even higher than ours on this turn, which will be the case on these double Broadway boards quite a bit. On these more connected turns, like on the 10-5 deuce board, the lower connected cards gave the out of position player a lot of 2 pair and straights, and the in position player in the check back line pretty much wouldn't have any straights. So you can start to see a lot of big betting. But on these Broadway boards, on these connected turns, it's going to give the in position player plenty of straights. So you shouldn't be putting in loads of big bets on these connected turns on these double Broadway boards. That's one of the main differences. So on a jack, similar thing. But again, overall frequency pretty low. Pairing turn, you'll see some big bets, but I wouldn't overbet this card at all. I would just block for like a third of the pot, which is, I mean, that's what I do in game. Just third of the pot with whatever you're betting and then checking. I mean, you shouldn't be betting this card much at all. It's a pretty good card for in position. On this card, betting frequency for out of position is going to go down even more. Pretty obvious it's a pretty bad card for us. Yeah, so my current strategy in game is just to use strictly a half pot size on this turn. But it looks like Equilibrium is blocking or overbetting. But the overbet frequency is pretty small. Yeah, I would just block this turn. This is just such a good card for in position. I would just block. That's going to be just fine. Then on the ace, again in the check line, the in position player is going to turn loads of ace x, so our frequency shouldn't be high at all. And the in position player is going to have straights and loads of 2 pair. Not loads, but again enough to disincentivize the out of position player from doing any massive betting. On this board specifically, on the ace turn, I'm just checking my entire range. Yeah, on these lower bricks, you're gonna be polarizing a good bit. You'll have some blocks with King X, and then some overbets. I would just merge these into the 1-2x size and put your bottom set, and looks like some 2-pair in there. So notice this queen 3 is almost strictly checking back the turn. Or I'm sorry, this is out of position. The in position player, okay, it's yeah, strictly betting the queen 3. But yeah, the out of position player will be checking a good bit of the queen 3, blocking in position checkbacks. Okay. Ace Queen 9. So this is a pretty unique texture. It's very, so it's high and it's quite wet. So the in position player should be doing quite a bit of checking back. So let's take a look at some of these. Yeah, so again, on these higher boards where the out of position player isn't doing so well, on these low bricks, going to be mostly polarizing. But yeah, the out of position player will have quite a bit of 2-pair and strong top pair they'll want to bet. When the bottom card pairs, I mean, this is a really good card for in position. I mean, they should be checking back lots of 9x. So on this card, yeah, the in position player should have plenty of trips. I mean, over 8%, 3 of a kind, so shouldn't be doing a ton of betting. It looks like there's some overbets, which I'm kind of surprised about. I would have expected mostly half pot or less, or mostly less than pot, I mean. So interesting. Let's look at these more connected turns. 10 of hearts. Let's see, we have 4.5% of straights as out of position. In position has quite a bit of 2-pair and straights. I see. The out of position player has almost 10% 2-pair, so that's quite a bit. Yeah, that would explain the overbet. But yeah, the in position player doesn't turn many straights, so I guess that would explain a bit of the big betting. But again, I wouldn't be overbetting this card. The in position player should have plenty of 2-pair and sets and straights and things. That's not really an intuitive overbet card to me. Okay. So overall, lots of checking, and then on these connected Broadway cards, not much big betting. But again, overall frequency pretty low. Let's take a look at 9, 4 deuce. Check, check. Pairs the bottom card. Again, some overbetting and some half potting, which you'll see on these lower boards. A more linear strategy for out of position. And again, on these Broadway turns, like a block size and an overbet size. So just be conscious of that. Let's see if there's some, so I have this other database pulled up here. Let's look at Ace King 3. That's an interesting one. Ace King 3, check check. Yeah, some bigger bets. But again, mostly checking. Yep, so just on these middling blanks on Ace King X, just going to be value betting the top portion of our Ace X. But not, like, we're not going to have any thin value bets. Like on these double Broadway boards in the check-check line on a turn brick, like, we're not going to be value betting second pair as the out-of-position player. You know, on the queen, you can probably just pot or check. Yeah, this king is nut worst card in the deck for the out of position player. So. Let's see. King 9-5 is a good one. I don't think we've done a like this yet. King high, wet board. Low brick. Wide range of bet sizes, but yeah, on these, this is a king high board, so out of position is going to be more at a disadvantage. But basically all that means is, when I say more at a disadvantage, I just mean like when we check, we're going to face more bets in the delay line on this board than we would on other boards. Because like if the in position player is going to be betting into you a lot, like the out of position player has less incentive to bet overall. So they're more just doing you know, big bets with the top of their range with hands, you know, they want to get the money in with. But yeah, it looks like on these wet boards you can start to have like a half pot size, like a more linear size. And again, on this ace turn, just big bet or check. Shouldn't be doing much betting on that turn. Let's see if I can. Okay, so this is sort of interesting. So notice that 6-7, 7-8, and 6-8 are all straight draws. So let's see, on the so we notice the out of position player using the smaller sizes on the 6. So on the 6, let's see, the in position player has, let's see, 3, like just under 4% of 2 pair plus. On the 7 has even more. On the 8 has even more. Yeah, so the overall frequency on the 8 for the out of position players is going to be the lowest. It looks like. So on the 8, on the 6, the in position player is going to have very few, like less than 4% 2-pair plus. So the out of position player is going to be doing a lot of big betting on this turn, because the out of position player has loads of 2-pair plus, especially like in comparison to the in position player. On the 7, yeah, the in position player is going to have similar proportion of 2-pair plus, but the out of position player is also not going to have as many strong hands. Still be doing some big betting with the top of the range, because the in position player again is quite capped. But it's not going to be taking like a quarter of its range for the overbet size like it would on a 6, just because the in position player on the 6 has close to nothing in terms of top of range advantage. So then on the 8, yeah, a good bit of big betting. Yeah, some more 2-pair, but not so much towards the top of the range. You'll again start to see some blocking on this turn. Yeah, starting to block 9x. But when developing an overarching strategy for the turn probe, you basically want to think about top of range advantage and overall frequency. So like overall frequency will be determined like by board texture. So like on King 9-5, the in position player is going to have quite a bit of an advantage on the flop, and so like on these low bricks, the in position player is going to maintain this advantage most of the time, because the texture didn't really change at all. So like the advantage the in position player had on the flop is going to continue on the turn. But once the texture changes quite a bit, you have to start putting some critical thought into developing your probe strategy. And like when the turn gives you lots of well, let's say the in position player has little to no nutted hands, well, you can start to develop lots of big bets, and the more the card hits your range per se, the higher your frequency. So let's see. Yeah, so on this 8, we see the frequency for the out of position player the highest. Let's see. And you should also notice this is the card that gives the out of position player the most straights and 2-pair, and doesn't give the in position player as much, but it's still pretty equal on this card. But think of this 8 as more of like an equalizing card. You see on this turn, the equities run much closer, as opposed to like a deuce, where like the out of position player is still pretty fucked. But yeah, like on these middling cards where you see the out of position betting frequency the highest, just notice how close the equities run on these cards. That's not a coincidence. It just gives the out of position player much more showdown value with their 6x hands, and then they turn lots of 2-pair and straights and things. So yeah, that's sort of the overall idea. So I think I'm going to cut the video off here, and I will make a separate video on delayed c-betting, which I think will be a great video. So thanks for watching, guys. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Helps the channel out a bunch. And yeah, feel free to drop video suggestions in the comment section. Thanks for watching.